Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. Each morning, at precisely 7 o'clock, I would dust the living room shelves. The familiar ritual began with the soft crackle of the dust cloth unfolding, its fabric whispering through the stillness. My fingers traced the polished wood, the same path they had followed countless times before. The faint scent of lemon polish, warm and nostalgic, lingered in the cool air, mingling with the distant hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Every book spine and trinket was lifted, wiped, returned to its rightful place, a choreography of objects and time. Today, though, as I reached for the third shelf from the top, something caught my eye, a thin layer of dust already there, as if yesterday had never happened. The cloth brushed over it once more, but the dust remained stubborn, refusing to be swept away. It was then, in the silent ticking that followed, I felt it, a subtle disquiet in the routine's repetition, a lingering presence that seemed to watch each careful stroke. I pressed the cloth harder against the wood, watching the dust particles dance in the pale light filtering through the curtains. They moved differently than they should have, swirling in patterns that defied the gentle air currents in the room. The lemon scent grew stronger, almost cloying now, as if someone had spilled an entire bottle of polish nearby. But I had been careful with my application, using only the smallest amount on the cloth's corner. The wooden surface felt warm beneath my palm, warmer than it should have been in the cool morning air. I pulled my hand away and examined the shelf more closely. The grain of the wood seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it, like water moving beneath ice. When I focused my gaze, everything appeared normal again. I decided to document what I was experiencing. Perhaps I was simply tired, or the light was playing tricks on me. I retrieved my phone and began recording a voice memo, speaking softly to avoid disturbing the strange atmosphere that had settled over the room. "The dust won't come off the third shelf," I whispered into the device. "It's been there for several minutes now, and the cloth isn't picking it up like it normally would." As I spoke, I noticed my voice sounded different through the phone's speaker, slightly delayed, and with an odd echo that shouldn't have existed in my small living room. I played back the recording immediately. My voice came through clearly, But underneath it, barely audible, was something else. A soft, rustling sound, like pages being turned in an old book. I hadn't been near any books while recording. The sound was rhythmic, purposeful, as if someone was searching through text for a specific passage. The refrigerator's hum had stopped, leaving the room in an unnatural quiet. Even the wall clock seemed muted, its ticking more felt than heard. I approached the shelves again, this time running my fingers along the edges where the wood met the wall. The surface vibrated gently, a tremor so subtle I might have imagined it, if not for the consistent pattern it followed. I began examining each item on the shelves more carefully. The small ceramic vase I had inherited felt ice cold, despite the warm wood beneath it. The collection of vintage books seemed heavier when I lifted them, their pages rustling even when I held them perfectly still. One book, bound in deep blue leather, fell open in my hands to a page I had never seen before, though I had owned the volume for years. The page was blank, except for a single line of text that appeared to be written in pencil. The dust remembers what we forget. I blinked hard, certain I was hallucinating, but the words remained. I flipped through the rest of the book, finding all the familiar content I remembered. But when I returned to that page, the sentence was still there, the graphite looking fresh, as if someone had just written it. My phone buzzed with a notification. A new voice memo had been saved to my recordings, but I hadn't made another one. I opened the file and pressed play. It was my voice again, but I had no memory of speaking these words. She watches from the spaces between, in the dust that settles, in the silence that follows. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. I could see my breath forming small clouds as I exhaled, yet the thermostat on the wall showed a normal reading. The lemon scent had transformed into something else entirely, something organic and earthy, like soil after rain, or the inside of an old wooden chest that hadn't been opened in decades. I decided to clean the entire shelf unit systematically, hoping that completing my routine would restore normalcy to the morning. But as I worked, I noticed that the dust I removed from one shelf would reappear on another, always staying one step ahead of my cleaning efforts. It formed patterns as it accumulated, swirling designs that looked almost like writing in a language I couldn't read. The light in the room began to behave strangely. Shadows fell at impossible angles, and my reflection in the window glass showed me standing in a different position than where I actually was. When I moved to test this, my reflection lagged behind by several seconds, as if it was reluctant to follow my movements. I recorded another voice memo, this one longer and more detailed. I described everything I was experiencing, speaking slowly and clearly to ensure accuracy. But when I played it back, the recording was completely silent, except for that same rustling sound, now louder and more insistent. It was definitely pages turning, but faster now, as if someone was frantically searching through a book. The blue leather book had fallen open again, this time to a different page. New text had appeared. She has been waiting in the dust for so long. Every morning, the same ritual, the same dance around her presence. But today she stirs. I slammed the book shut, but it immediately fell open again to yet another page with more text. The cloth cannot remove what has taken root. The dust is not dust. It is memory made manifest, longing given form. My hands trembled as I backed away from the shelves. The entire room felt alive now, breathing with a rhythm that didn't match my own. The walls seemed to pulse gently, and the floor beneath my feet felt less solid than it should have. I could hear something moving within the walls themselves, a soft scratching sound like fingernails against wood. The dust on the shelves had begun to move more actively, forming shapes that looked disturbingly like human figures. They were small and indistinct, but they moved with purpose, gathering in clusters and dispersing in patterns that suggested communication or coordination. I tried to leave the room, but the doorway seemed farther away than it should have been. Each step I took toward it appeared to add distance rather than close it. The scratching sounds in the walls grew louder, more urgent, as if whatever was inside was trying to break through. The voice recordings on my phone had multiplied. There were now dozens of them, all time-stamped from this morning, though I had only made a few. I played one at random and heard my voice saying things I had never spoken. She lived in this house once. She cleaned these same shelves, followed the same routine. But something happened, something that trapped her between the dust and the wood, between memory and forgetting. Another recording continued the narrative. Every morning she tries to clean away her own presence, but she cannot. She is the dust now, and the dust is her. And and she has been so very lonely. The temperature continued to drop, and frost began forming on the windows despite the season. My breath came in sharp puffs as I realized I was no longer alone in the room. There was a presence beside me, not visible, but undeniably there, matching my movements and breathing in sync with my own. The blue book had opened to its final page, where new words appeared as I watched. She does not want to be forgotten. She does not want to be cleaned away. She wants someone to see her, to acknowledge her presence, to understand that she is still here. I understood then what was happening. The dust wasn't just dust. It was the remnants of someone who had once lived here. Someone who had performed the same morning ritual I had adopted. She had become part of the house itself, existing in the spaces between cleaning and settling, between memory and oblivion. But understanding didn't provide escape. The room had become a trap, a loop of routine and repetition that she controlled. Every morning I would dust the shelves, and every morning she would make herself known a little more clearly, drawing me deeper into her world of suspended existence. The doorway had vanished entirely now, replaced by more shelves that stretched endlessly in all directions. The dust figures had grown larger and more defined, and I could see her among them now, a woman in a faded dress, her face kind, but infinitely sad. She held a dust cloth in her translucent hands, mirroring my own movements as she had been doing all along. She spoke without words, her voice coming through my phone's recordings. You understand now. You see me. But seeing me means joining me. The ritual must continue, but it need not be lonely anymore. I felt the dust cloth in my hand growing heavier, more substantial, as if it was becoming part of me. My reflection in the window showed me growing fainter, more translucent, while she became more solid and real. We were trading places, sharing the burden of eternal routine. The last thing I recorded was my own voice, though I don't remember speaking. Tomorrow someone else will dust these shelves. They will find the stubborn dust that won't come clean, and they will feel our presence watching, waiting, hoping to be understood. The room returned to normal dimensions. The doorway reappeared, and the temperature rose to comfortable levels. But I remained part of the dust now, part of the morning ritual that would continue indefinitely. Someone new would come to clean these shelves, and we would be here, waiting in the spaces between motion and stillness, between cleaning and settling. The dust remembers what we forget. But now we are the dust, and we remember everything. Story 2. Entry. The coffee tastes different when you stir it counterclockwise. I discovered this by accident, or maybe I always knew. The spoon feels heavier in my palm now, like it's made of something denser than silver. When I hold it up to the window, the light bends wrong around the edges. Entry. My neighbor knocked yesterday. She wanted to borrow sugar, but her eyes kept drifting to my hand. I realized I was still holding the spoon, had been holding it while I answered the door. Her smile flickered when she saw it. She left without the sugar. Entry. The twist in the metal is more pronounced. I can feel it when I run my thumb along the handle, a gentle spiral that wasn't there before. Or was it? Memory is such a fragile thing. I've started keeping the spoon in my pocket. The weight is reassuring. Entry. I found myself in the kitchen at some point, standing barefoot on cold tiles. The spoon was on the counter, perfectly positioned next to an empty cup. I don't remember putting it there. The silence felt thick, expectant. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming. Entry. The grocery clerk stared when I paid. I followed her gaze to my hand. My fingers were curved as if holding something, but my pockets were empty. I could still feel the phantom weight of the spoon against my palm. The sensation lingered all the way home. Entry. 3 people have mentioned my hands today. The mailman, the woman at the coffee shop, my sister during our phone call. They all said the same thing, that I was making stirring motions while talking. I wasn't aware of it. I checked my pocket. The spoon was there, warm as body temperature. Entry. I tried using a different spoon for my morning coffee. The liquid remained stubbornly still, refusing to swirl. My hand cramped, trying to force the motion. The familiar spoon called to me from across the kitchen, its surface catching light that shouldn't exist in my dim morning space. Entry. The twist is spreading. What started as a subtle curve in the handle now extends toward the bowl of the spoon. The metal looks almost organic, like something that grew rather than was forged. I trace its new contours obsessively. My fingertips have worn smooth grooves in the surface. Entry. I dreamed I was stirring the air itself, watching invisible currents swirl around the spoon. I woke, my arm ached as if I'd been moving it for hours. The sheets were twisted in perfect spirals around my body. The spoon lay on the pillow beside me, though I distinctly remember leaving it in the kitchen. Entry. The reflection in the spoon's bowl shows things that aren't there. Shadows moving behind me in an empty room. Faces that dissolve when I turn around. I've stopped looking directly at it, but peripheral vision betrays glimpses of motion, of presence, of something watching back. Entry. My coffee cup cracked today. A perfect spiral fracture running from rim to base. The sound it made when it finally split was like a whisper, like recognition. I poured the coffee down the drain and watched it swirl counterclockwise, darker than it should be, leaving stains that won't wash away. Entry. The spoon is changing me, or I am changing it. The distinction feels meaningless now. My thoughts move in circles, spiraling inward toward some center I can't name. I catch myself stirring empty air, my hand moving in perfect rhythm with something I cannot see, but absolutely feel. Entry. People avoid me now. They don't say why, but I see it in their sideways glances, the way they step back when I approach. Perhaps they can sense what I'm becoming, or what's becoming of me. The spoon pulses against my leg like a second heartbeat, syncing with my own. Entry. I understand now why the metal had to change shape. Straight lines can't hold what's growing inside it. The spiral is a vessel, a conduit, a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. My fingers have learned its contours so completely that I could find it in absolute darkness. Entry. The stirring never stops anymore. Even when my hand is still, I feel the motion continuing somewhere deeper, in spaces between thoughts, in the pause between heartbeats. The spoon has become part of me, or I have become part of it. The distinction. Entry. Stir, stir, stir the silence, until it thickens into something else, something hungry, something that recognizes the shape of surrender, the weight of metal, the spiral path inward, where all things dissolve into the endless turning motion that began before I was born and will continue long after. Entry. The spoon knows my name now. I never told it, but it knows. Story 3. I find myself once again standing at the edge of the room where the ritual begins, the soft scrape of the chair against the floor, the faintest echo of its legs settling into the grooves worn by endless endless repetitions. A wooden box sits before me, its lid slightly ajar, and my fingers trace the outline of its delicate carvings. Inside, objects nestled in velvet, each one cold and familiar, await my touch. The sound begins, a whispering hum that coaxes me into motion as I reach for the first item. Every move aligns with the quiet rhythm pulsing through the room, a pattern I know well. But now, the objects resist. The once smooth surface prickles under my fingertips, and the hum stutters, catching in my throat like an untold secret. The room's air thickens, a muted flutter against my skin, and with each cycle, my memory slips further from reality's tether. I repeat the gesture, waiting for its conclusion, but the moment stretches, elongating past recognition. My body continues the sequence, but the outcome I expect never arrives. A new sensation creeps in, a gentle tug of wrongness, as if the room itself exhales, altering the script we have both long performed. The walls breathe with me, their pale surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. I know this room, don't I? The way the light filters through fabric that shouldn't be there, casting shadows that bend at impossible angles. My bare feet press against floorboards that creak in harmonies I've heard before, yet the melody feels foreign against my skin. I lift the first object, a small metal sphere that should be warm but radiates cold, that seeps through my palm and travels up my arm like liquid mercury. The sensation triggers something, a fragment floating to the surface of my consciousness like debris from a shipwreck. I remember a garden where flowers bloomed in reverse, their petals folding inward while their stems grew shorter. I was younger then, my hands smaller as they reached toward blossoms that whispered my name in voices I almost recognized. But the flowers had no mouths, no throats to form the sounds that drifted on air thick with the scent of copper pennies and vanilla. The memory dissolves as I place the sphere back in its velvet cradle. My fingers find the next item, a piece of smooth glass that feels rough against my skin, its surface covered in microscopic mountains my eyes cannot see. The contradiction doesn't surprise me anymore. Nothing here obeys the rules I thought I understood. Another fragment surfaces. I'm sitting in a kitchen where steam rises from a cup that holds no liquid. Across from me, someone speaks without moving their lips, their words entering my mind through the spaces between my thoughts. They're telling me about the importance of remembering, about how forgetting is both a gift and a curse. But their face shifts each time I try to focus on it, features rearranging themselves like puzzle pieces that refuse to form a complete picture. The conversation feels urgent, though I can't grasp why. Something about choices, about doors that close behind us, and paths that spiral inward rather than forward. The person's hands gesture toward a window where snow falls upward, each flake a tiny white lie ascending toward a sky that tastes of salt and disappointment. I return to the present, if this can be called present. The glass object has grown warm in my palm, or perhaps my hand has grown cold around it. The distinction seems meaningless now, another boundary that has blurred beyond recognition. I place it carefully beside the sphere, watching as both items seem to pulse with their own inner light, though the illumination casts no shadows. The third object calls to me before I reach for it, a length of ribbon that should be silk, but feels like water made solid. As my fingers close around it, the texture shifts, becoming rough like tree bark, then smooth like river stones, then something else entirely that has no name in any language I know. This triggers the strongest memory yet. I'm standing in a hallway lined with doors, each one slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of rooms that shouldn't exist. Through one gap, I see a library where books write themselves, their pages turning while invisible hands guide pens across paper that bleeds ink upward instead of absorbing it downward. Through another, a bedroom where someone sleeps standing up, their feet rooted to floorboards that have grown around their ankles like wooden shackles. I walk down this hallway, my footsteps echoing ahead of me rather than behind, as if my future self is leading me toward something I'm not ready to understand. The air here smells of rain that has never fallen and bread that has never been baked, scents that exist only in the spaces between what is and what might be. At the end of the hallway stands a mirror that reflects not my image, but my intentions, showing me reaching for door handles I haven't touched yet, speaking words I haven't formed. I watch myself in the reflection, moving through actions I will take, and I realize I'm trapped in a loop of predetermined gestures that feel like choices, but offer no alternatives. The ribbon slips from my fingers, returning me to the room where the ritual continues. But something has changed. The wooden box now contains 4 objects instead of 3, and I have no memory of the fourth arriving. It's a key made of what looks like crystallized breath, translucent and constantly shifting between solid and vapor. When I touch it, my fingertip passes through its surface, yet I can still feel its weight in my palm. More memories cascade now, overlapping and contradicting each other. I remember the same garden, but this time the flowers are singing in frequencies that make my teeth ache. I remember the kitchen conversation, but now the person across from me is wearing my face while I watch from inside their eyes. I remember the hallway of doors, but the rooms beyond them have rearranged themselves, showing me scenes from a life I might have lived if I had made different choices. In one room, I see myself as someone who never learned to forget, carrying every moment like stones in my pockets until the weight of memory crushes me into the earth. In another, I am someone who forgot too much, wandering through days that have no connection to each other, each moment isolated and meaningless. Both versions of myself are reaching toward something just beyond their grasp, their fingers stretching toward an understanding that retreats like shadows at dawn. The key dissolves in my hand, leaving behind a sensation of absence that feels more real than presence ever has. I look into the box and see that it now contains objects. I don't recognize a small hourglass filled with what might be sand or might be ground bone. A compass whose needle points toward magnetic north in a world where directions have lost their meaning. A photograph of a place I've never been, but somehow remember visiting. I understand now that the ritual isn't about the objects themselves, but about the spaces between them, the pauses that stretch like held breath, while reality decides what it wants to become. Each item I touch creates ripples in the fabric of memory, and those ripples interfere with each other, creating patterns that make sense only to the part of my mind that has learned to speak in contradictions. There's one memory that refuses to surface completely, lurking at the edges of my consciousness like a shadow cast by invisible light. I can feel its weight, its importance, but whenever I reach toward it, it retreats further into the gray spaces where thoughts go to hide from themselves. This memory is different from the others. It doesn't fragment or shift or contradict itself. It simply waits, patient and immutable, for me to become ready to receive it. But I'm afraid of what it might contain. The other memories, strange as they are, feel safe in their impossibility. Their dreams made manifest, metaphors given flesh, symbols that dance just beyond interpretation. This hidden memory feels real in a way that makes the rest of my existence seem like elaborate fiction. I continue the ritual, touching each object in sequence, feeling their surfaces change beneath my fingertips. The room around me breathes with a rhythm that doesn't match my heartbeat, and I realize I've been holding my breath without knowing it. When I finally exhale, the sound mingles with the whispered hum that never stops, creating harmonies that taste of copper and regret. The hidden memory stirs, pushing against the barriers I've built around it. I see flashes a hand reaching toward mine, a voice saying words I chose not to hear, a moment when I could have acted differently, but decided that forgetting would be easier than remembering. The memory isn't traumatic or violent. It's simply true in a way that makes all my other truths feel like comfortable lies. I remember now. I remember choosing this room, this ritual, this endless cycle of touching objects that change their nature to match my need for confusion. I remember being offered a different path, one that led toward clarity and connection, and the kind of love that demands complete presence. I remember turning away from that offer, not because I was afraid of love, but because I was afraid of the person I would have to become to deserve it. The ritual was my solution, my way of creating a reality where nothing had to be real, where every moment could be rearranged, until it lost its power to demand anything from me. I chose the loop, the confusion, the endless repetition that would keep me safe from the consequences of genuine choice. But even as I remember choosing this, I feel the memory beginning to fade, dissolving like sugar in rain. The ritual pulls me back into its embrace, offering me another cycle of beautiful confusion, another chance to lose myself in the spaces between meaning and meaninglessness. I find myself once again standing at the edge of the room where the ritual begins the soft scrape of the chair against the floor, the faintest echo of its legs settling into the grooves worn by endless repetitions. A wooden box sits before me, its lid slightly ajar, and my fingers trace the outline of its delicate carvings. Inside, objects nestled in velvet, each one cold and familiar, await my touch. But this time, I notice something different. The grooves in the floor are deeper, worn by more repetitions than I remember. The objects in the box have shifted positions, arranging themselves in patterns that suggest meaning I'm not ready to understand. The whispered hum carries undertones of sadness now, as if the room itself has grown tired of our endless dance. I reach for the first object, knowing that I will touch it, knowing that it will change beneath my fingers, knowing that I will remember and forget and remember again. The cycle continues, as it always has, as it always will, until I find the courage to choose something else. The sound begins, a whispering hum that coaxes me into motion, and I surrender once more to the beautiful confusion I have created, the endless ritual that keeps me safe from the terrifying possibility of being truly, completely, irreversibly real. Story 4. The ticking is the first thing I notice each morning, a metronome echo that marks the start of my day. It blends with the soft rustle of sheets as I rise, the cotton whispering against my skin. The routine is seamless, comforting even until today. Today, each tick seems to creep closer, louder, as if the walls themselves are bending in to listen. I sweep my hand across the wooden surface of the dresser, fingertips trailing along its familiar grain, but the texture feels inexplicably coarse, like paper rubbed the wrong way. The clock's chime strikes, not quite right, its notes tangling in the air as if caught in some unseen net. My breath catches, a rising wave against the rhythm, and I find myself pausing, unable to recall if this dissonance has always been there, or if it's just begun. I press my palm flat against the dresser's surface, feeling for that strange roughness again. The wood responds with a subtle warmth that spreads up through my wrist, pulsing in rhythm with something I can't identify. My reflection stares back from the mirror above, but the angle seems wrong somehow, as if I'm looking at myself from slightly too high, or perhaps too low. The morning light filtering through the curtains casts shadows that don't quite match the furniture's placement. The floorboards creak as I move toward the window, each step producing a hollow sound that seems to echo longer than it should. Outside, the street appears normal enough, but there's a quality to the silence that makes my skin prickle. No birds singing, no distant hum of traffic, just an oppressive quiet that feels thick as cotton in my ears. I decide to document this feeling, this wrongness that clings to everything like static electricity. My journal sits on the nightstand, its leather cover cool under my touch. As I write, the pen scratches against the paper with unusual resistance, leaving marks that appear darker than they should. The words flow out of me. Something has shifted. The familiar has become foreign, and I can't pinpoint when the change began. The kitchen beckons with the promise of routine, of coffee and normalcy. But even here, the wrongness follows. The refrigerator's hum carries an undertone I've never noticed before, a low frequency that seems to vibrate in my chest cavity. When I open it, the light inside flickers once, twice, then steadies, but not before I catch a glimpse of something that makes me blink hard and look again. For just a moment, the shelves appeared deeper than they should be, stretching back into impossible darkness. I shake my head, attributing it to sleepiness, but my hands tremble as I reach for the milk carton. The liquid pours normally enough, yet when I lift the cup to my lips, there's a metallic aftertaste that coats my tongue like copper pennies. The coffee maker gurgles and spits, producing sounds that almost form words, almost make sense, but dissolve into mechanical noise whenever I focus too intently. Throughout the day, I find myself returning to these small anomalies, turning them over in my mind like worry stones. I make notes, sketching the strange angle of my reflection, describing the texture of the dresser, the quality of light that seems somehow thicker than usual. Each observation feels important, urgent even, though I can't explain why. The walls of my home seem to pulse with their own rhythm now, a slow breathing that I feel more than hear. When I place my ear against the plaster, there's a sound like distant conversation, voices speaking in a language that tickles the edge of recognition, but never quite resolves into meaning. The paint feels warm under my cheek, and I pull away to find a faint handprint left behind in condensation that shouldn't exist. My phone buzzes with messages from the outside world, but the screen displays them with a slight delay, as if the words are traveling through thick syrup to reach me. The voices on calls sound distorted, underwater, and I find myself asking people to repeat themselves more and more frequently. They claim they're speaking normally, but their words arrive to me wrapped in cotton, muffled and strange. As the day wears on, the anomalies multiply. Door frames seem narrower when I'm not looking directly at them, forcing me to turn sideways to pass through openings that should accommodate me easily. The stairs to the second floor have gained an extra step somewhere in the middle, though counting them yields the same number as always. My footsteps on the carpet leave impressions that remain visible far longer than they should, as if the fibers are reluctant to spring back to their original position. The bathroom mirror reflects my image with a slight lag, like a video call with poor connection. I raise my hand and watch as my reflection follows a heartbeat behind, creating a disorienting dance of delayed motion. The water from the faucet runs clear, but tastes of minerals and something else, something organic and unsettling that makes me spit and rinse repeatedly. I call a friend, desperate for an outside perspective, but the conversation feels scripted, artificial. Their responses come too quickly, as if they know what I'm going to say before I say it. When I describe the strange occurrences, they laugh it off with phrases that sound rehearsed, empty reassurances that ring hollow in my ears. The line crackles with interference that forms almost patterns, almost music, and I find myself listening to the static more intently than to their words. That evening, I sit in my living room with my journal, documenting everything with obsessive detail. The lamp beside me flickers occasionally, not the steady pulse of a dying bulb, but irregular flashes that seem responsive to my writing. When I describe the morning's events, it dims. When I write about my growing unease, it brightens almost imperceptibly. The house settles around me with sounds that are too deliberate, too rhythmic to be random. Creaks and groans form a pattern that my mind tries desperately to decode. A message hidden in the language of wood and metal. I record these sounds on my phone, playing them back at different speeds, but the meaning remains just beyond my grasp. Sleep becomes elusive. I lie in bed listening to the walls breathe, feeling the floor vibrate with some deep, slow pulse that seems to emanate from far below. The darkness in my room has weight and texture, pressing against my skin like velvet. When I reach out to touch the nightstand, my fingers encounter empty air where solid wood should be. Yet when I turn on the light, everything appears normal. The next morning brings no relief. The wrongness has intensified, spreading through my home like an infection. Photographs on the walls show scenes I don't remember taking, faces that are almost familiar, but not quite right. The books on my shelves have rearranged themselves into an order that follows no system I can identify, yet feels purposeful, intentional. I decide to leave, to escape whatever is happening within these walls. But as I reach for the front door handle, it turns liquid under my touch, flowing between my fingers like mercury. The door itself remains solid, immovable, while the handle continues to shift and change shape. I pull my hand away to find silver residue on my palm that evaporates even as I watch. The windows offer no better escape route. The glass has become thick, distorting the outside world into an impressionist painting where colors bleed and shapes refuse to hold their form. When I press against it, the surface gives slightly, like pressing against skin, warm and yielding in a way that makes my stomach turn. I retreat to the center of the house, journal clutched against my chest, pen shaking in my grip. The walls are definitely breathing now, expanding and contracting in slow, hypnotic rhythm. The ceiling seems lower, the floor softer, as if the entire structure is becoming organic, alive. My reflection in every surface shows the same delayed response, and I begin to wonder if I'm seeing myself at all, or something else wearing my face. The house speaks to me now in creaks and sighs, in the whisper of air through vents that lead nowhere, in the subtle shift of shadows that move independent of any light source. I write frantically, trying to capture every detail, but the words on the page blur and swim, rearranging themselves into messages I didn't intend to write. My phone screen shows my own face calling me, and when I answer, I hear my own voice speaking words I'm not saying, describing events I haven't experienced yet. The conversation loops and echoes, creating a feedback of reality that makes my head spin and my vision blur. I realize now that I'm not just observing these changes, I'm part of them. The house isn't transforming around me. We're transforming together, becoming something new and impossible. My reflection finally catches up to my movements, but now it moves independently, mouthing words I can't hear, reaching for things that aren't there. The journal in my hands writes itself now, filling pages with observations in my handwriting, but not my thoughts. It describes sensations I haven't felt yet, events that are still coming, a future where the boundaries between myself and this place have dissolved completely. I close my eyes and feel the walls pulse with my heartbeat. Or perhaps my heart has learned to beat with the walls. The distinction no longer matters. When I open them again, the room has changed once more. But so have I. The wrongness isn't wrong anymore. It's simply different, and I'm different too. The ticking that started it all has evolved into something more complex, a symphony of temporal displacement that I now understand isn't marking the passage of anything as simple as seconds or minutes. It's counting something else entirely, something that that has no name in any language I used to know. I am still here, still writing, still documenting. But what I am documenting, and who is doing the documenting, has become beautifully, terrifyingly unclear. The house breathes, I breathe. We breathe together in perfect synchronization. And I wonder if I was ever separate from this place at all, or if that was just another illusion, another familiar thing that needed to become foreign before it could become true. Story 5. Hash the draft. The soft hum of the ceiling fan barely disturbed the room's stillness, spreading a faint scent of lavender from the fresh linens. As evening shadows stretched across the walls, the comforting glow of the lamp cast a warm circle on the floor. Yet, a peculiar chill swept across the back of my neck, as if an open window let in the night air. I turned slowly, my eyes tracing every corner of the room, but nothing was amiss except that unsettling draft that grew colder with each passing moment. I find myself seated in a chair I don't remember choosing. The fabric beneath my palms feels wrong, too smooth, like silk, though it appears to be ordinary cotton. My fingers trace the armrests, searching for familiarity, but the texture shifts under my touch, becoming rougher, then softer again, as if the material can't decide what it wants to be. The room breathes around me. That's the only way I can describe it. The walls seem to expand and contract with a rhythm I can almost hear, a whispered cadence that tickles the edges of my consciousness. I know this place, don't I? The burgundy curtains, the way they hang just slightly crooked, the small table with its collection of objects I should recognize, but somehow don't. There's a photograph there, face down. I want to reach for it, but my arms feel heavy, disconnected from my intentions. Instead, I let my gaze drift to the window where those shadows continue their slow dance across the glass. The light outside has that quality of perpetual dusk, neither fully day nor completely night, suspended in an amber moment that refuses to progress. The scent of lavender grows stronger, but underneath it lurks something else, something metallic and sharp that makes my sinuses tingle. I breathe deeper, trying to identify it, and suddenly I'm somewhere else entirely. I'm standing in a kitchen, my hands submerged in warm, soapy water. The dishes clink softly as I wash them, a soothing rhythm that should be comforting. But the water is too warm, almost scalding, and when I look down, the bubbles aren't white, they're faintly pink, swirling in patterns that remind me of smoke. I lift a plate, and for just a moment, I see my reflection in its surface, but the face looking back isn't quite right. The eyes are too wide, the mouth slightly open as if caught mid-scream. The memory dissolves like sugar in rain, and I'm back in the chair. The photograph on the table has shifted. I'm certain it was closer to the lamp before, but now it sits near the edge, as if someone moved it while I wasn't looking. The draft against my neck intensifies, carrying with it a sound like distant conversation, voices that rise and fall in familiar patterns, though I can't make out any words. I try to remember how I got here. The effort feels like pushing through thick fog, each thought requiring enormous concentration. There was a car, I think. The smell of leather seats and that particular stuffiness of closed windows. But when I try to recall the journey, the details scatter like startled birds. Instead, another fragment surfaces. I'm in a garden, kneeling among roses that bloom in impossible colors, deep purples that seem to absorb light, yellows so bright they hurt to look at. My hands work the soil, but it's not earth beneath my fingernails. It's something grittier, more like sand, and it clings to my skin with an oily residue that won't wash away, no matter how hard I scrub. Someone is watching me from the house. I can feel their gaze like a physical weight between my shoulder blades. But when I turn, the windows are empty, reflecting only sky. The roses smell too sweet, cloying, and underneath that sweetness is the same metallic tang I noticed in the room with the chair where I'm sitting now, though the roses are gone. My hands rest on the armrests, and I notice my fingernails are clean. Too clean, as if they've been scrubbed raw. The skin around them looks irritated, slightly red, though I don't remember washing them. The ceiling fan continues its lazy rotation, but I realize the blades are moving in the wrong direction, counterclockwise, when they should spin the other way. The realization brings a flutter of panic to my chest, though I can't explain why this detail matters so much. I watch the blades turn, mesmerized by their backward dance, and the room seems to tilt slightly, as if the world has shifted on its axis. The voices in the draft grow clearer, though still wordless. They sound familiar, one higher, one lower, engaged in what might be an argument, or perhaps just an animated discussion. I strain to listen, leaning toward the source of the sound, but it remains tantalizingly out of reach, like trying to remember a song you've only heard in dreams. Another memory blooms, this one sharper than the others. I'm sitting at a table, similar to the one across from me now, but in a different room. The walls are yellow instead of this soft blue-gray, and sunlight streams through uncurtained windows. Across from me sits someone whose face I can't quite see, as if it's always turned slightly away or caught in shadow. We're playing a game, though I can't remember the rules. Cards are spread between us, but they're blank, completely white on both sides. Yet somehow the game makes perfect sense in that moment. I know which cards to play, when to pass, how to win. The other player's hands move with fluid grace, placing card after card with certainty that matches my own. But then I notice their hands aren't quite right. The fingers are too long. The joints bend at odd angles, and when they reach for a new card, their skin seems to ripple like water disturbed by a stone. I want to look at their face, but every time I try, my gaze slides away as if repelled by some invisible force. The memory fractures, leaving me back in the chair with the sensation that I've forgotten something crucial. The photograph on the table seems to pulse with importance, but when I try to focus on it, my vision blurs. The draft carries a new scent now, something like burnt coffee mixed with ozone, the smell that lingers after lightning strikes. I remember driving, but not in a car. I'm behind the wheel of something larger, higher off the ground. A truck, maybe, or some kind of van. The road stretches endlessly ahead, perfectly straight, lined with trees that all look identical. Every few minutes, I pass the same red mailbox, the same weathered fence post, the same cluster of wildflowers growing by the roadside. It should be impossible to pass the same landmarks repeatedly on a straight road, but in the memory, it feels perfectly natural. I drive with the windows down, and the air that rushes and carries voices the same ones I hear now in this room. They seem to be coming from the radio, but when I look down, the dashboard is smooth and featureless. No radio in sight. The steering wheel feels warm under my hands, too warm, as if someone else has been gripping it moments before. The seat adjusts itself as I drive, moving forward and back without my input, trying to find the perfect position for a body that isn't quite mine. Back in the room, I notice the lamp has dimmed. Not suddenly, but gradually, like sunset in reverse. The warm circle of light on the floor has shrunk, and the shadows seem more eager now, pressing closer to my chair. The photograph appears darker too, though it's still face down, still hiding whatever image it contains. I try to stand, but my legs won't cooperate. Not paralyzed exactly, but reluctant, as if they remember something my conscious mind has forgotten. The effort of trying to rise brings another memory, this one more disturbing than the rest. I'm in a bathroom, standing before a mirror that reflects everything except my face. I can see the white tiles behind me, the chrome fixtures, the towels hanging on their hooks. But where my reflection should be, there's only empty space shaped like a person. I reach up to touch the mirror, and my hand appears in the reflection, but my arm seems to emerge from nothing, disconnected from any body. The faucet runs without my turning it, filling the sink with water that's too dark to be clean. I cup my hands under the stream, and the liquid feels thick, viscous, though it looks like ordinary water in my palms. When I splash it on my face, it's ice cold, so cold it burns. And when I look up again, the mirror shows my reflection perfectly clearly, but it's not quite me. The face is familiar, but wrong in subtle ways. The eyes set a fraction too far apart. The mouth slightly asymmetrical. The hair parted on the wrong side. The reflection moves a beat behind my actions, like a badly dubbed movie. And when I smile tentatively, it frowns back at me. The memory ends abruptly, leaving me gasping in the chair. The room feels smaller now, the walls closer than before. The ceiling fan's backward rotation has increased in speed, creating a soft whooshing sound that almost drowns out the voices in the draft. Almost, but not quite. I force myself to focus on the photograph. It holds answers, I'm certain of it. The knowledge sits in my chest like a stone, heavy and undeniable. But every time I try to reach for it, my arm stops just short, trembling with an effort I don't understand. The scent of lavender has faded, replaced entirely by that metallic tang. And something else, something organic and slightly sweet, like fruit just beginning to turn. The combination makes my stomach clench, though I can't place why it seems so familiar. Another fragment surfaces, this one briefer but more vivid. I'm holding something small and delicate, turning it over in my hands. It's beautiful and terrible at once, though I can't see what it is clearly. My fingers know its shape, recognize its weight, but my eyes refuse to focus on the details. Whatever it is, it's important, crucial. kind of thing you'd never willingly lose. But then it's gone, slipped from my grasp, and I'm searching frantically through grass that's too green, too uniform, like artificial turf. My hands tear at the perfect blades, but they come away empty, and the thing I've lost seems to burrow deeper into the earth with every passing moment. In the chair, my hands clench involuntarily, as if still searching. The gesture brings a flash of pain, not physical, but emotional, raw, and immediate. Loss so profound it steals my breath. The voices in the draft change pitch, becoming more urgent. They seem to be calling to me, though I still can't make out words. The sound pulls at something deep in my chest, a recognition that bypasses conscious thought. I know those voices. I've heard them before, in circumstances I can't quite remember. The backward ceiling fan creates patterns in the air, invisible currents that I can somehow see. They spiral downward like smoke, carrying with them fragments of memories that don't quite fit together. A blue door that opens onto darkness. Hands that gesture without moving. Eyes that watch from photographs that change when no one's looking. I remember being lost, but not in any physical sense. Lost in a conversation that went in circles, where every answer led to the same question, where understanding seemed always just one word away. The other person whose face I still can't see clearly spoke in riddles that made perfect sense until I tried to remember them later. The room tilts again, more noticeably this time. The photograph slides slightly across the table's surface, and I hear it scrape against the wood with a sound like fingernails on glass. The noise sends shivers down my spine, awakening some primal fear I can't name. I close my eyes, trying to center myself, but behind my lids, I see the room exactly as it is, as if my eyelids have become transparent. The shadows move independently of their sources. The curtains sway without any breeze, and the photograph begins to turn itself over. I force my eyes open, but the image remains. Two realities layered on top of each other, slightly out of sync, creating a disorienting double vision that makes me dizzy. In one version, the photograph lies face down, as it has since I arrived. In the other, it's upright, displaying an image that my mind refuses to process clearly. The draft grows stronger, carrying with it the sound of footsteps that don't quite match any rhythm I know. They approach recede in patterns that seem significant but remain just beyond my understanding. Each step echoes strangely, as if the room has dimensions I can't perceive. The memory I've been avoiding lurks at the edges of my consciousness like a dark tide. I can feel it pressing against the barriers I've constructed, patient but insistent. It wants to be remembered, to be acknowledged, to be faced. But some instinct deeper than thought keeps pushing it away. Instead, I remember a conversation about forgetting. Someone explaining how memory works, how the brain protects itself by burying things too painful to bear. The voice was kind, but clinical, professional in its detachment. They spoke of choices, how sometimes we decide to forget, actively participate in our own amnesia. The words made sense at the time, but now they feel like pieces of a puzzle scattered across a dark floor. I can touch the edges of understanding, but can't see the complete picture. The room breathes around me again. That subtle expansion and contraction that might be my imagination, but feels utterly real. With each breath, the walls seem to remember something I've forgotten, and the air itself becomes heavy with unspoken knowledge. The ceiling fan slows, its backward rotation becoming more deliberate, more purposeful. Each blade cuts through the air with surgical precision, dissecting moments into fragments that refuse to coalesce into meaning. The voices in the draft fade to whispers, then to something that might be breathing, then to silence so complete it rings in my ears. And in that silence, the blocked memory finally surfaces. I'm sitting in this same chair, in this same room, having this same realization, but not for the first time. I've been here before, not just once, but repeatedly, cycling through the same confusion, the same gradual recovery, the same moment of terrible understanding. The photograph contains no image at all. It's empty, a frame holding nothing but the reflection of whoever looks into it. I've been staring at my own face this entire time, but seeing it as something foreign, something wrong, because each time the cycle begins again, I'm slightly different, slightly less myself than before. The memories aren't mine, they're fragments left behind by previous versions of me, echoes of experiences that happened to someone who wore my face but wasn't quite me. Each cycle strips away another layer, another piece of who I was, replacing it with something else, something that fits the room's strange geometry better than my original self ever could. The draft against my neck isn't air at all. It's the breath of all the selves I've been, all the iterations that have sat in this chair and discovered this truth, only to forget it again when the cycle resets. They're still here, layered like transparent sheets, watching me realize what they realized, knowing I'll forget just as they did. The room doesn't breathe, I do, but with lungs that belong to multiple versions of myself, creating a rhythm that's never quite synchronized. The voices aren't coming from outside, but from inside, the accumulated whispers of every conversation I've had with myself across countless repetitions. I chose this. That's the most disturbing part. Somewhere, somewhen, I made the decision to forget, to let myself be remade, to trade authenticity for the strange peace of eternal confusion. The alternative, remembering clearly, holding onto the truth of what I am and what I've done, was too much to bear. But what was it? What truth was so unbearable that I chose this endless loop of forgetting and rediscovering? The answer hovers just beyond reach, protected by layers of self-imposed amnesia that even this moment of clarity can't fully penetrate. The lamp dims further. The shadows press closer. The ceiling fan slows to a stop, its blades pointing in directions that somehow suggest words I can't read. The photograph lies face down again, though I never saw it turn. I feel the familiar weight of forgetting settling over me like a blanket. My thoughts grow fuzzy around the edges, the sharp clarity of understanding softening into comfortable confusion. The cycle is beginning again, and part of me, the part that chose this, welcomes it. The soft hum of the ceiling fan barely disturbs the room's stillness, spreading a faint scent of lavender from the fresh linens. As evening shadows stretch across the walls, the comforting glow of the lamp casts a warm circle on the floor. Yet, a peculiar chill sweeps across the back of my neck, as if an open window lets in the night air. But this time, when I turn slowly to trace every corner of the room, I notice something different. The photograph on the table, I'm almost certain it was face up before. And the draft that grows colder with each passing moment carries with it the faintest echo of my own voice, whispering words I can't quite remember saying. The chair beneath me feels familiar in a way that should be comforting, but isn't. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice asks a question I'm not ready to answer. How many times have I been here before? The ceiling fan begins its backward rotation, and I settle in to discover, once again, what I've chosen to forget. Story 6. It's the sound that first caught my attention, an almost imperceptible click, as the brass key turns in the lock at dusk, echoing faintly through the hall. At first, I dismissed it as a curious anomaly, a clumsy homeowner perhaps. But with each evening, as the shadows begin to lengthen, I find myself waiting for it. The scene is unchanged, the door slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of fading light to stretch across the floor. The same patterned rug, its edges never quite frayed, lies undisturbed beneath the threshold. And there, nestled in the dusty corner, the solitary shoe. Its laces untied, a slight indentation where a foot should rest, yet it never moves. I try leaving the door wide open, locking it, even rearranging the rug, but dusk comes, and with it, the unchanged sequence, the key, the click, the shoe. A looped melody of mundane oddities, whispering of a time or place just out of reach. It's as if the house itself is rehearsing for an audience of one, and I, its reluctant spectator, am caught in its unwavering performance. The scent arrives before the sound now. Something metallic and sweet, like copper pennies left in honey. It seeps through the floorboards, rising with the settling of the house. I've grown accustomed to positioning myself near the stairwell, notepad balanced on my knee, pen poised to capture any deviation from the routine. The anticipation has become a ritual of its own. Today, I decide to document everything with more precision. The brass key bears scratches along its teeth, worn smooth by countless turns. The door's hinges whisper rather than creak, as if they've been recently oiled despite my never touching them. The shoe, a brown leather Oxford, size 10, according to the faded marking, inside rests at precisely the same angle each evening. I measure the distance from the wall, 4 3/4 inches, never varying. When I lean closer to examine the shoe, my breath fogs the air despite the warmth of the house. The temperature drops several degrees in that corner, though the thermostat reads normal throughout the rest of the space. I press my palm against the wall where the shoe sits. The surface vibrates with an almost imperceptible pulse, like a heartbeat transmitted through plaster and wood. I begin recording these sessions on my phone, hoping to catch nuances my ears might miss. The playback reveals layers I hadn't noticed before. Beneath the key's click, there's a whisper of fabric brushing against itself, as if someone is adjusting their clothing. Behind that, even fainter, comes what sounds like breathing that doesn't quite match the rhythm of my own lungs. The recordings become my obsession. I enhance the audio, isolating frequencies, amplifying the quietest moments. What emerges chills me more than any obvious supernatural occurrence could. There are words buried in the static, fragmented and reversed, speaking in a voice that sounds disturbingly familiar yet impossible to place. The phrases repeat, not yet ready, still waiting, almost there. I experiment with different positions in the hallway, testing whether the phenomenon changes based on my location. From the bottom of the stairs, the click sounds hollow, echoing as if the hallway extends much further than its actual length. From beside the front door, it carries a metallic resonance that makes my teeth ache. But from my usual spot, 3 feet from the mysterious door, everything feels perfectly calibrated, as if I'm standing in the exact position someone intended. The realization disturbs me more than I care to admit. This isn't random. The performance, as I've come to think of it, requires my presence in a specific location to achieve its full effect. I am not merely observing. I am participating in something that was designed with me in mind. I try skipping an evening, forcing myself to remain upstairs with music playing loudly through headphones. But even through the artificial barrier, I feel the moment arrive. The hair on my arms stands up. My skin prickles with electricity. And despite my determination to ignore it, I find myself removing the headphones and listening. The click comes anyway, muffled by distance, but unmistakably present. The next evening, I return to my post with a mixture of defeat and curiosity. The familiar sequence unfolds, but now I notice additional details. The light that streams through the doors, opening flickers occasionally, though no clouds pass overhead outside. The shadows cast by the shoe shift subtly, as if the light source is moving despite the sun's fixed position in the sky. I reach for the shoe, determined to break the pattern. My fingers pass through empty air where the leather should be solid. The shoe is there, I can see it clearly, can observe how the light plays across its worn surface, but it exists in a space my hands cannot access. When I pull back, my fingertips are ice cold and tingling with numbness that takes several minutes to fade. The pattern begins expanding, beyond the evening ritual. I start noticing the metallic honey scent at random moments throughout the day. The sound of the key turning echoes from rooms I know are empty. Reflections in mirrors show the hallway behind me even when I'm facing away from it. And in those reflections, the door stands wide open instead of merely ajar. I purchase additional recording equipment, setting up multiple devices to capture the phenomenon from various angles. The results are inconsistent in ways that defy logic. Some devices record nothing but ambient silence during the exact moments when others capture the full sequence. The recordings that do pick up the sounds reveal details that change between playbacks, as if the audio files are somehow alive and evolving. My sleep becomes fragmented. I wake to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, but when I investigate, I find only the usual scene: door ajar, light streaming across the floor, shoe in its designated corner. Except now, these discoveries happen during the deepest part of the night, when no natural light should exist to create that golden beam across the floor. The boundary between the evening ritual and the rest of my existence begins to blur. I catch myself unconsciously positioning objects in my home at precise angles, mimicking the shoe's placement. I start leaving doors slightly ajar throughout the house, drawn to recreate that specific gap that allows just enough light to create the hallway's mysterious atmosphere. The most disturbing development comes when I realize I've begun timing my daily activities around the ritual. I plan meals, phone calls, and errands to ensure I'm free when the performance begins. The compulsion feels natural, as if it's always been part of my routine. But when I review my calendar from weeks past, I see the gradual shift in my schedule, the slow rearrangement of my life around something that shouldn't matter. I decide to document this realization, to write down exactly how the phenomenon has changed my behavior. But when I sit down with pen and paper, I find myself instead sketching the hallway scene over and over again. The drawings emerge without conscious direction, my hand moving across the page while my mind focuses elsewhere. Each sketch reveals details I hadn't consciously observed. Minute scratches on the door frame, a water stain on the ceiling directly above the shoe, wallpaper seams that don't quite align properly. The sketches begin appearing throughout my house, drawn in my handwriting, but created during moments I cannot remember. I find them tucked between book pages, taped inside kitchen cabinets, folded carefully in my coat pockets. Each one shows the same scene, but from slightly different perspectives, as if I've been documenting every possible angle of the mysterious hallway. One evening, as I settle into my usual position to observe the ritual, I notice something that stops my breath entirely. In the corner where the shoe always rests, a second shoe has appeared. A perfect match to the first, positioned at the exact same angle, laces untied in an identical fashion. The pair sits there as if they've always been together, as if my memory of a single shoe was somehow mistaken. But I know better. I have dozens of sketches, hundreds of photographs, countless audio recordings that document only one shoe. Yet here they are, a complete pair. And when I review my most recent documentation, every single image shows both shoes exactly as they appear now. The realization that my records are changing retrospectively should terrify me. But instead, I feel a strange sense of completion. The scene looks more balanced now, more purposeful. Whatever force orchestrates this nightly performance has been building toward this moment, adding elements gradually until the tableau achieves its intended form. I reach toward the shoes again, and this time my fingers encounter solid leather. The surface is warm, as if recently worn, and slightly damp with perspiration. I lift one of the shoes, feeling its weight, examining the wear patterns on the sole. They match my own foot size perfectly. As I hold the shoe, the hallway around me begins to shift. The walls stretch longer, the ceiling rises higher, and the light streaming through the door takes on a quality that suggests it originates from somewhere far more distant than the world outside. The familiar scent of metal and honey intensifies until it becomes almost overwhelming. And beneath it, I detect something else. The smell of my own skin, my own breath, as if I'm inhaling the essence of myself from some other time or place. The brass key begins turning in the lock again. But now, I can see the hand that guides it. My hand, wearing a watch I don't recognize, moving with purpose and familiarity, as if this action has been performed countless times before. I watch myself complete the ritual from both sides, simultaneously observing from my position near the stairs, while also experiencing the sensation of turning the key, of stepping through the doorway, of carefully placing my shoes in their designated corner. The performance was never meant for an audience. I was never the spectator. I am both the actor and the observer, caught in a loop that exists outside normal reality, rehearsing for a moment that has already happened and is yet to come. The house wasn't performing for me, it was teaching me to perform for myself, preparing me for a role I was always meant to play. As this understanding settles over me, the hallway returns to its normal dimensions, but nothing else will ever be the same. I know now that every evening, as the shadows lengthen, I will take my position near the stairs to watch myself arrive home. I will document the ritual, analyze the sounds, sketch the scene, all while simultaneously living it from the other side. The brass key turns in my pocket, though I don't remember putting it there. The metallic honey scent has become my own fragrance. And somewhere in the space between observer and observed, between memory and anticipation, I understand that the performance will continue indefinitely, with an audience of one who is also the star of the show. The only question that remains is whether I've always been both, or if I'm only now becoming aware of what I've been rehearsing for all along. Story 7. In the dim warmth of the early morning kitchen, I reached for my favorite ceramic mug, nestled among the orderly ranks on the shelf. The soft clink of dishes being nudged, and the distant hum of the refrigerator played the quiet symphony of dawn. Steam curled from the coffee pot, promising comfort and routine. I poured the rich liquid, watching it swirl and settle as I lifted the mug to my lips, expecting the familiar heat. A shiver ran through me. The coffee was already cool, as if it had been standing untouched for hours. The mug felt heavier, almost as if it resisted being held. I placed it back on the table, the faintest sound of a sigh whispering through the room as I pondered this new peculiarity. The refrigerator's hum seemed to pulse, growing deeper and more resonant with each breath I took. I pressed my palm against the cool surface of the kitchen counter, grounding myself in its familiar texture. The marble felt different somehow, warmer than it should be, as though something beneath it was generating heat. I ran my fingers along its edge, feeling a subtle vibration that seemed to match my heartbeat. I decided to make fresh coffee, discarding the mysteriously cold liquid down the drain. The water gurgled strangely as it disappeared, creating an echo that lingered longer than physics should allow. The sound reminded me of whispered words, though I couldn't make out any distinct syllables. I filled the pot with fresh water, the tap producing its usual steady stream. Yet the sound seemed muffled, as if coming from a great distance. While the new batch brewed, I wandered into the living room, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting familiar patterns across the furniture. But something was wrong with my shadow. It fell at an angle that didn't match the window's position, stretching toward the corner where shadows shouldn't reach. I moved closer to the window, watching my reflection in the glass. For just a moment, it seemed to lag behind my movements, like a delayed mirror image trying to catch up. The coffee maker beeped, its electronic chirp sounding deeper than usual, almost distorted. I returned to the kitchen, noting how the sound of my footsteps seemed to echo from rooms I wasn't walking through. The fresh coffee steamed invitingly, and I poured another cup, this time testing the temperature with my finger before drinking. It was perfectly hot, yet when I brought it to my lips, the same chill ran through me, and the liquid had turned cold again. I set the mug down with more force than intended, the ceramic ringing against the table like a small bell. The sound seemed to activate something in the house. The refrigerator's hum shifted pitch, climbing higher before settling into a rhythm that sounded almost like breathing. I opened the refrigerator door, and the light inside flickered, casting strange shadows that moved independently of my position. Everything appeared normal inside. Milk, leftover containers, condiments in their usual spots. But there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, something metallic, like old pennies, mixed with the scent of rain on hot pavement. I closed the door, and the smell lingered, growing stronger rather than fading. I decided to document what was happening, retrieving my notebook from the kitchen drawer. The pen felt unusually heavy in my hand, and when I began to write, the ink seemed to flow too freely, creating letters that were darker and thicker than they should be. I described the cold coffee, the strange shadows, the mysterious scent. As I wrote, I could hear a faint scratching sound coming from somewhere else in the house, as if someone else was writing too, their pen moving in perfect synchronization with mine. The scratching stopped when I stopped. I held my breath, listening. The house had fallen completely silent. No refrigerator hum, no settling creaks, no distant traffic. Even the usual morning sounds from outside had vanished. The silence pressed against my eardrums like physical weight. I walked through the house, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the void of sound. In the hallway, I noticed that the family photos on the wall seemed different. The faces were the same, but their expressions had shifted slightly, becoming more somber, their eyes following me as I passed. I stopped in front of one picture, studying it closely. The longer I looked, the more convinced I became that the person in the photo was trying to mouth words, their lips moving in tiny, almost imperceptible increments. The silence broke suddenly with a sound from upstairs, a gentle thudding, like someone walking in soft slippers. But I lived alone, and no one else had a key. The footsteps moved with purpose, pacing back and forth across the bedroom floor directly above me. I counted the steps. 7 forward, pause, 7 back. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking under my weight in a way they never had before. The wooden banister felt warm and slightly damp, as though someone with sweaty palms had just gripped it. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched before me, longer than it should be. The bedroom door at the end seemed farther away than usual, and the walls appeared to curve slightly, creating an optical illusion that made me dizzy. The footsteps had stopped. I approached the bedroom door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The metal was ice cold, so cold it almost burned my palm. I turned it slowly, the mechanism clicking with unusual loudness. The door swung open to reveal my bedroom exactly as I had left it, bed unmade, clothes draped over the chair, morning light streaming through the windows. But the air in the room was different. It felt thick, almost viscous, and carried that same metallic scent I had noticed in the kitchen. I stepped inside and immediately felt the temperature drop several degrees. My breath began to mist slightly, though the heating system was working perfectly. The floorboards under my feet felt unstable, as if they were floating on water rather than supported by solid joists. I approached the window, drawn by something I couldn't identify. The view outside was wrong. The familiar street, the neighbor's house, the old oak tree, they were all there, but the colors were muted, as if I were looking through tinted glass. More disturbing was the movement. Everything outside seemed to be happening in slow motion. A bird flying past appeared to be suspended in amber, its wings barely moving. A car driving down the street crept forward at an impossibly slow pace, its occupant visible, but motionless behind the wheel. I pressed my face against the glass, trying to get a better look. window was warm against my skin, warmer than it should be on a cool morning. As I watched, my breath fogged the glass, but the condensation formed patterns that looked almost like letters, spelling out words I couldn't quite read before they faded away. A sound from downstairs made me turn. It was the coffee maker beeping again, the same distorted electronic chirp. But I hadn't started another pot. I hurried downstairs, my feet barely touching the steps, and found the kitchen exactly as I had left it, except for the coffee maker, which was brewing a fresh pot despite being empty when I went upstairs. The machine gurgled and hissed, producing sounds that seemed almost organic, like a living thing processing food. I watched the dark liquid drip into the pot, but instead of the usual brown coffee, the liquid appeared almost black, with an oily sheen on its surface. The smell wasn't coffee anymore, it was that metallic scent, now so strong it made my eyes water. I unplugged the machine, but it continued brewing. The digital display flickered, showing numbers that didn't correspond to any setting I recognized. The numbers changed constantly, counting up and down in no discernible pattern. I tried pressing buttons, but they felt soft under my fingers, like pressing into flesh rather than plastic. The scratching sound returned, louder now, coming from multiple directions. It seemed to originate from inside the walls themselves, as if something was moving through the spaces between the studs. I pressed my ear against the wall, and the scratching stopped immediately, replaced by what sounded like whispering. The voices were too faint to understand, but there were definitely multiple speakers, having what seemed to be an urgent conversation. I grabbed a glass from the cabinet and pressed it against the wall, using it to amplify the sound. The whispering became clearer, though the words remained indistinct. What chilled me was the realization that one of the voices sounded like my own voice, having a conversation with unknown others, discussing things I couldn't remember saying. The coffee maker finally stopped its impossible brewing, and the kitchen fell silent again. But now I could hear my heartbeat, unnaturally loud, echoing through the house as if the walls were amplifying it. Each beat seemed to trigger a response, a creak here, a settling sound there, as if the house itself was alive and responding to my vital signs. I returned to my notebook, needing to record these new developments. But when I opened it, the pages I had written earlier were blank. The ink had vanished vanished completely, leaving only faint impressions in the paper where my pen had pressed. I tried writing again, but this time the words appeared and then slowly faded, disappearing even as I watched. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. I answered it, expecting to hear a familiar voice, but there was only static that seemed to contain fragments of sound, like pieces of conversations that had been shredded and scattered. I listened carefully and gradually began to make out words, my own words, speaking sentences I had never said, making plans I had never made, talking to people I didn't recognize. I hung up, but the phone immediately rang again. This time, when I answered, I heard my own voice clearly, having a conversation with someone else. But I wasn't speaking, I was listening to myself talk, discussing the strange events in my house with someone who seemed to know more about them than I did. The other voice was familiar too, though I couldn't place it. It sounded like someone I should know, someone important, but the harder I tried to identify it, the more it slipped away from recognition. The conversation continued for several minutes, with my recorded voice describing events that hadn't happened, yet things I would discover later, things I would experience in the coming hours. The other voice offered explanations that made no sense, talking about overlapping realities and temporal displacement, as if these were everyday occurrences. When the call ended, I realized the house had changed again. The kitchen walls seemed closer together, the ceiling lower. The windows appeared smaller, letting in less light despite the advancing morning. I measured the room with my steps, counting carefully, and confirmed that it was indeed smaller than before. The house was contracting around me, slowly but perceptibly. I tried the front door, needing to escape this shrinking space, but the handle wouldn't turn. It wasn't locked, it simply wouldn't move, as if it had become part of the door itself. The windows were similarly unresponsive, their latches fused in place. I was trapped in a house that was gradually becoming smaller, with phenomena I couldn't explain, and voices that seemed to know more about my situation than I did. The scratching in the walls intensified, now accompanied by a low humming that seemed to come from the foundation itself. The house was singing, producing harmonics that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I sat at the kitchen table, trying to think rationally about what was happening, but rational thought seemed increasingly difficult. My mind felt foggy, as if I were thinking through thick cotton. The coffee mug sat before me, still full of the impossible black liquid. Steam rose from its surface, carrying that metallic scent directly to my nostrils. Despite everything, I felt compelled to drink it. My hand moved toward the mug without conscious direction, my fingers wrapping around its handle. The ceramic was now burning hot, so hot it should have scalded my skin, but instead it felt comfortable, inviting. I lifted the mug to my lips, and as the dark liquid touched them, the world around me shifted dramatically. The kitchen walls became transparent, revealing the spaces inside them where shadowy figures moved back and forth, the sources of the scratching and whispering. They noticed me watching and turned in my direction, their faces indistinct but somehow familiar. The house continued to contract, the walls now close enough that I could touch both sides of the kitchen simultaneously. But instead of feeling claustrophobic, I felt strangely comforted, as if the house were embracing me, drawing me into itself. The shadowy figures in the walls reached out, their hands pressing against the transparent barriers that separated us. I understood then that I had been wrong about being alone. I had never been alone in this house. The others had always been there, just out of sight, just beyond perception, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The coffee, the cold liquid that defied physics, had been their invitation, their way of preparing me for this transition. The walls pressed closer, and I made no attempt to resist. The notebook in front of me began filling itself with words, my handwriting documenting events from perspectives I had never experienced, conversations I had never had, thoughts that weren't entirely my own. The scratching sounds resolved into a symphony of movement, the others welcoming me into their space between spaces. As the kitchen walls touched my shoulders, I realized I was no longer entirely myself. Part of me remained, but I was also becoming something else, someone else, joining the collective of voices that had been trying to communicate with me. The house stopped contracting, having reached its optimal size, and I settled into my new existence within its walls. The phone rang again, and I heard my voice answering, talking to someone new who had just discovered their coffee had gone mysteriously cold. I listened to myself offering explanations that made no sense, discussing overlapping realities and temporal displacement as if these were everyday occurrences. Another invitation had been extended, Another transition was beginning. The house hummed with satisfaction, its work continuing, its collection growing. And I hummed along, no longer entirely myself, but not entirely lost either, existing in the spaces between what was and what could be, waiting for the next person to notice that their morning coffee had gone cold without reason. Story 8. I shiver as I enter the room, where the air clings like a second skin, thick with a scent that evokes forgotten moments. The strange aroma, like the ghost of lavender, perhaps wafts from unlit candles standing neatly in a crooked row along the mantelpiece. Despite their silence, they seem to whisper. The wallpaper, faded and peeling at the edges, hints at a pattern that teeters on the edge of recognition, invoking a sense of déjà vu that prickles at the back of my mind. I can almost hear the soft rustle of its curling corners, a sound trapped between waking and sleep. With each step, the floorboards yield reluctantly, groaning beneath my weight as though they carry secrets they can no longer bear. I look around, sensing an unsettling pause in the air, as if time itself has taken a deep breath and held it. The window, slightly ajar, invites a breeze that should be cool, but feels heavy, laden with the scent of rain that never comes. I brush against the velvet drapes that seem to cling to my touch, begging not to be drawn, yet the compulsion tightens, and I realize my hands are trembling. I count the candles again. 7. Always 7, though I could have sworn there were 6 when I first glanced. The phantom lavender grows stronger, threading through my thoughts like smoke through fabric. My fingertips trace the wallpaper's raised ridges, following what might be roses or might be eyes, depending on how the light catches them. The pattern shifts. Not visibly, I would notice that, but in my peripheral vision, where certainty dissolves. When I focus directly on any section, it remains static, innocent. But the moment my attention drifts, something ripples, something breathes. I find myself returning to this room repeatedly, though I cannot recall making the decision to come here the first time. Each visit reveals new details that feel ancient and familiar. The way dust motes spiral in perfect helixes near the window. The faint impression of a handprint on the glass, always just out of direct sight. The soft depression in the carpet where someone might have stood for hours, waiting. My journal fills with observations I don't remember writing. Notes about the temperature dropping exactly 3 degrees when I approach the mantelpiece. Sketches of the wallpaper pattern that seem to move when I'm not looking at them directly. Lists of sounds that have no source. The whisper of fabric against skin. The gentle scrape of fingernails on wood. The barely audible hum that might be breathing, or might be the house settling into itself. The candles never burn, yet their wax shows signs of melting and reforming. I discover this by running my finger along their surfaces, feeling the smooth irregularities that suggest they've been lit countless times. The lavender scent intensifies when I touch them, flooding my senses with memories that aren't mine or perhaps are mine, but from a version of myself I've forgotten. I begin to document everything with obsessive precision. The exact angle of sunlight streaming through the window. The number of wallpaper curls that have separated from the wall. The rhythm of the house's breathing. For I've come to understand that's what the settling sounds represent. This place inhales and exhales with the patience of something that has learned to wait, but my documentation becomes unreliable. Words rearrange themselves on the page when I'm not watching. My handwriting shifts between familiar and foreign, sometimes mid-sentence. The sketches I make of the room show details that aren't visible to my conscious eye shadows in corners where no shadows should fall, additional candles that exist only on paper, doors in walls that remain stubbornly solid when I press against them. The wallpaper pattern begins to make sense in ways that terrify me. What I initially mistook for roses are indeed eyes, but not human eyes. They belong to something that understands observation from the inside out. Something that has been watching me watch them, learning the rhythm of my attention, the patterns of my breath, the precise moment when my certainty wavers. I realize I've been here before, not just recently, but always. The déjà vu isn't a feeling, it's recognition. My handprint matches the one on the window glass. The depression in the carpet corresponds exactly to where I stand when I count the candles. The lavender scent is my own perfume, aged and concentrated by countless visits to this room that exists in the spaces between intention and action. The trembling in my hands spreads through my entire body as understanding crystallizes. I am not visiting this room. I am not documenting anomalies. I am becoming them. Every observation I make weaves me deeper into the pattern. Every note I write adds another layer to the wallpaper's design. Every breath I take here makes the air a little thicker for the next visitor. The candles flicker without flame. The wallpaper eyes blink in unison. The house exhales, and I realize the breath is mine, repeated and echoed, until it becomes the foundation of this place's existence. I am the secret the floorboards can no longer bear. I am the whisper that emerges from unlit wicks. I am the pattern that shifts when no one is looking directly. My journal falls from numb fingers, its pages fluttering open to reveal writing that isn't writing but wallpaper print. Observations that aren't observations but confessions. Sketches that aren't sketches but blueprints for becoming something other than human. The room welcomes me home with the scent of lavender and the weight of recognition. I take my place among the pattern, another eye in the design, another breath in the rhythm, another trembling hand reaching toward velvet drapes that will cling to the next visitor's touch. The window remains slightly ajar, inviting the next seeker with a breeze heavy, with the promise of rain that never comes. The candles stand ready in their crooked row, patient as monuments. The wallpaper rustles softly, its new pattern complete but never finished, always ready to accommodate another observer who believes they are documenting rather than joining. I count 7 candles and wonder if there were 6 before, feeling the familiar prickle of déjà vu that signals the beginning of recognition. The air clings like a second skin, thick with the scent of forgotten moments that are about to be remembered by someone who thinks they are entering this room for the first time. Story 9. The room is as it has always been, filled with the subtle hum of the everyday. The soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner sets a familiar rhythm, one that used to accompany my morning preparations like an old, comforting friend. Today, however, there's a peculiar pause in its cadence, a hesitation that makes my skin prickle with unease. Standing still in my usual spot, where the morning light should touch everything just right, I feel off balance, as if the very air has decided to change its course. The hands of the clock are moving, yet they seem to waver slightly, as if questioning their purpose. I shake my head, trying to dismiss the unsettling notion. Still, a whisper of doubt lingers, twining through my thoughts with the gentle persistence of a stranger's gaze from across a silent room. I reach for my coffee cup on the side table, the ceramic cool against my palm, despite the warmth that should still be radiating from within. The liquid inside moves with a strange viscosity, forming tiny ripples that spread outward in perfect concentric circles without any apparent cause. I watch, mesmerized, as the surface tension seems to hold patterns that remind me of something I cannot quite place. A memory hovers at the edge of my consciousness, elusive as smoke. The wallpaper beside the window catches my attention next. The familiar floral pattern appears subtly different, as though someone has rearranged the blooms while I slept. The roses that once faced toward the center of each panel now seem to turn away, their petals curling inward with what feels like deliberate intention. I step closer, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor, and trace one of the flowers with my fingertip. The paper feels warm, almost pulse-like beneath my touch. A soft, scratching sound emanates from somewhere within the walls. Not the scurrying of mice or the settling of old wood, but something more rhythmic, more purposeful. It starts near the baseboard and travels upward in measured intervals, as if something is writing or drawing behind the plaster. I press my ear against the cool surface, feeling the vibrations travel through my skull like whispered secrets in a language I almost understand. The scratching pauses, then begins again in a different location. This pattern continues as I move through the room, always seeming to follow my movements, always staying just out of direct observation. I find myself holding my breath, listening with an intensity that makes my temples throb. The sound forms a rhythm that matches neither my heartbeat nor the faltering tick of the grandfather clock, but something entirely its own. My reflection in the mirror above the mantelpiece appears fractionally delayed, as if the glass requires a moment to process my image before displaying it. I raise my hand and watch as my reflection does the same, but with a hesitation so slight I might have imagined it. The face looking back at me seems familiar yet foreign, like recognizing yourself in an old photograph where the lighting has changed everything you thought you knew about your own features. I begin to notice other small discrepancies. The books on my shelf have shifted their positions, creating gaps that form shapes reminiscent of letters or symbols. The shadows cast by the furniture fall at angles that don't quite match the direction of the morning light streaming through the window. The air itself seems to shimmer occasionally, as if heat waves are rising from invisible sources throughout the room. My journal sits open on the desk, though I don't remember leaving it that way. The pages flutter gently despite the absence of any breeze, and I approach to find words written in my own handwriting that I have no memory of composing. The sentences speak of observations I've apparently been making, patterns I've been tracking, connections I've been drawing between seemingly unrelated phenomena. According to these notes, the scratching in the walls follows a specific sequence that repeats every few cycles. The clock's irregular ticking corresponds to moments when other anomalies manifest. The shifting positions of objects in the room create a kind of map or diagram that changes gradually over what my handwriting claims are extended periods of careful observation. I read these entries with growing unease, recognizing my own voice in the words, yet feeling completely disconnected from their creation. The handwriting is undeniably mine, down to the particular way I cross my letters and the slight rightward slant that has characterized my script since childhood. Yet the content feels like discovering someone else's thoughts written in my own hand. The journal describes experiments I don't remember conducting, tests involving the placement of small objects to see if they would move during the night, measurements of temperature variations in different corners of the room, detailed sketches of the changing patterns in the wallpaper, documented with a precision that suggests hours of careful study. One entry describes how the room seems to breathe, expanding and contracting in almost imperceptible increments. Another notes the way dust motes in the morning light move in formations that defy the expected randomness of air currents. The writing becomes increasingly focused on these observations, as if nothing else in the world holds any significance. I flip through more pages, finding drawings that show the room from various angles, each slightly different from the last. In some sketches, doorways appear where none exist. In others, windows are positioned on walls that should be interior. The perspective in each drawing is subtly wrong, as if viewed through a lens that bends reality at its edges. The most recent entries describe a growing awareness that the room is aware of me in return. The scratching in the walls responds to my movements. The patterns in the wallpaper shift based on where I direct my attention. The very air seems to adjust its texture and temperature in response to my emotional state. I close the journal and immediately feel the weight of observation settling over me like a fine dust. Every surface in the room seems to pulse with quiet attention. grandfather clock's irregular rhythm now sounds less like malfunction and more like a form of communication. Each hesitation and acceleration carrying meaning I'm beginning to decode without conscious effort. The scratching resumes, and this time I can hear it more clearly. It's not random movement, but deliberate marking, as if something is keeping track of my discoveries, updating its records as I update mine. The sound travels through the walls in patterns that mirror the diagrams in my journal, creating a three-dimensional map of connections I'm only beginning to understand. I realize I'm no longer standing in my usual spot by the window. Somehow, I've moved to the center of the room without any awareness of walking there. My feet are positioned precisely where the floorboards form a natural intersection. And from this vantage point, all the anomalies I've been observing seem to align into a coherent whole. The roses in the wallpaper now clearly form spirals that draw the eye inward toward points that exist beyond the surface of the wall. The shadows cast by furniture create geometric patterns that pulse and shift with the rhythm of the scratching. The dust motes in the morning light swirl in formations that spell out symbols I recognize from my journal sketches, though I have no memory of learning their meaning. My reflection in the mirror has stopped following my movements entirely. It stands perfectly still, watching me with an expression of patient curiosity, as if waiting for me to understand something crucial. The face in the mirror is definitely mine, yet it seems to possess knowledge that I lack, a comprehension that remains just beyond my grasp. The coffee cup in my hand has grown cold, and the liquid inside has formed crystalline patterns that catch and reflect the morning light in ways that hurt to look at directly. Each reflection seems to show a different version of the room, variations where the furniture is arranged differently, where the windows look out onto landscapes I've never seen, where the walls are covered in symbols instead of floral wallpaper. I set the cup down on the nearest surface and watch as it immediately begins to vibrate, creating tiny ripples that spread outward in mathematical precision. The vibrations travel through the table, into the floor, and up through the walls, becoming part of the greater rhythm that now seems to encompass everything in the room. The air itself has taken on a thickness that makes each breath feel significant, as if I'm inhaling something more substantial than oxygen. My thoughts move with increasing sluggishness, yet my perception of the room's anomalies grows sharper and more detailed. I can now see the individual threads in the wallpaper rearranging themselves, forming new patterns that shift faster than I can track. The scratching in the walls has evolved into something more complex, a symphony of movement that seems to emanate from every surface simultaneously. It's no longer behind the walls, but within them, part of their essential structure, as integral to their existence as the wood grain or the paint that covers them. I understand now that the room has been trying to communicate with me, and my journal entries are not records of my observations, but translations of its messages. Each pattern, each anomaly, each subtle shift in the familiar environment is part of a larger conversation that has been ongoing far longer than I realized. My reflection in the mirror finally moves, but not to mimic my actions. Instead, it turns away from me entirely, walking deeper into the reflected room until it disappears from view, leaving the mirror to show only empty space where I should be standing. The morning light streaming through the window begins to bend and curve, casting illumination that follows the spiral patterns in the wallpaper, rather than the straight lines physics would dictate. The room fills with a golden radiance that seems to emanate from within the walls themselves, warm and welcoming, yet utterly alien. I realize I can no longer remember what the room looked like before the anomalies began. The grandfather clock's irregular rhythm now sounds perfectly natural, and I cannot recall what regular ticking should sound like. The shifting patterns in the wallpaper seem like the most normal thing in the world, and I wonder why I ever found them strange. The scratching in the walls has become a comfortable background sound, like rain on a roof or waves against a shore. It speaks to me in a language I understand without words, telling me stories of other rooms, other observers, other conversations between spaces and their inhabitants. I find myself back at the window, though I don't remember moving there. The morning light touches everything just right, exactly as it should, and I feel perfectly balanced, as if the air has found its proper course at last. The grandfather clock ticks with its familiar rhythm, each hesitation and pause exactly where it belongs, accompanying my preparations like an old, comforting friend. The room is as it has always been, filled with the subtle hum of the everyday. Story 10. At dusk, as shadows stretched across the room, the flame flickered to life on the worn candlestick without assistance. Its presence was always serene, a small beacon dancing until midnight. Each evening, at precisely the same moment, it began, the wick unconsumed, the wax unspent, poised on the edge of reality. There was a soft rustle, as if the very air had sighed, and yet silence reigned, thick and unyielding. I watched, as if ensnared by unseen strings, my movements mirroring the soft sway of the light. Everything was as it had been yesterday and the day before. The same page turned in my open journal, the same pen resting beside it, untouched. Each attempt to extinguish it met with the same stubborn defiance, the flame reigniting as soon as shadows reclaimed the room. A gentle, constant rhythm lured me into its muted spell, an unbroken cycle that wrapped itself around my thoughts, drawing them tighter with each passing day. The flame speaks in whispers I cannot quite hear. Not voices, no something softer, like the sound of breath held too long. I find myself leaning closer, my ear tilted toward the golden light, waiting for words that never fully form. The wax remains smooth, unmarked by heat, as if the candle exists in a state of perpetual beginning. I have begun to notice patterns in the way it flickers. 3 quick pulses, then a steady glow, then a single sharp dance to the left. Always the same sequence when I first sit down to observe. My journal pages have filled with these notations, sketches of flame shapes, attempts to map the rhythm. The pen moves across the paper without my conscious direction, creating symbols that look almost like letters, but belong to no alphabet I recognize. The room breathes around me. I feel it in the subtle shift of air pressure, the way dust motes spiral in impossible helixes near the candle. The walls seem to expand and contract, just barely, like the inside of lungs. When I press my palm against the wallpaper, I swear I can feel a pulse underneath, slow and steady, matching the rhythm of the flame. My reflection in the window has started to lag. I turn my head, and for just a moment, the face in the glass continues staring straight ahead before catching up. The delay grows longer each evening. Sometimes I wave, and the reflection waves back a heartbeat too late, as if the image must travel through thick water to reach the surface. The journal entries from previous days blur together when I try to read them. The ink seems to shift, words rearranging themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. I wrote about the candle's behavior. I'm certain of it. But now the pages describe things I don't remember observing. Shadows that form geometric patterns on the ceiling. The sound of footsteps in the room above, though I live on the top floor. The taste of copper that fills my mouth whenever the flame burns brightest. I have tried to leave the room when the candle ignites, but my body refuses to cooperate. My legs feel heavy, rooted to the chair, while my eyes remain fixed on the dancing light. The harder I try to look away, the more vivid the flame becomes, until it seems to fill my entire field of vision with golden warmth. The photographs on my desk have begun to change. Faces I recognize smile differently now, their eyes tracking my movement across the room. In one picture, a figure stands in the background who was never there before, a silhouette that grows clearer each time I glance at it, though I can never quite make out the features. My skin has developed a strange sensitivity to temperature. The air near the candle feels thick and warm, like honey, while the rest of the room grows cold enough that my breath forms small clouds. I watch these clouds drift toward the flame, where they spiral and dissolve into patterns that remind me of the symbols appearing in my journal. The boundary between sleep and waking has become uncertain. I find myself standing in front of the candle at all hours, watching its impossible dance, though I remember going to bed. My dreams are filled with the same golden light, the same gentle swaying, and when I wake, I cannot tell if I ever truly slept at all. The flame has begun to cast shadows that don't match its shape, while the light itself dances in its familiar pattern. The shadow on the wall behind it moves independently, forming shapes that look almost like gestures, like someone trying to communicate through silhouette. I hold my own hand up to block the light, but my shadow doesn't appear, only the flame's strange, writhing darkness continues its silent performance. My voice has started to echo strangely in the room. When I speak aloud, the words seem to bounce back from impossible angles, returning to me altered, as if filtered through the golden light. Sometimes I hear my own voice asking questions I don't remember speaking, and I find myself answering in whispers that sound foreign to my ears. The candle's flame has grown taller, stretching toward the ceiling in a thin column of light that seems to pierce through the plaster and into the space beyond. I can see through it now, as if it were a window rather than fire, glimpsing rooms that don't exist in my house, corridors that stretch into darkness, figures moving just beyond the edge of visibility. My reflection has stopped following my movements entirely. The face in the window now moves independently, mouthing words I cannot hear, gesturing towards something behind me that isn't there when I turn to look. Sometimes it smiles when I'm not smiling, or frowns when I feel perfectly calm. The journal writes itself now. I watch the pen move across the page without my hand guiding it, forming words in my handwriting that describe experiences I'm not certain I've had. It tells of conversations with the flame, of messages received through the patterns of shadow and light, of a growing understanding that I cannot access through my conscious mind. I have become part of the pattern. My breathing synchronizes with the flame's dance. My heartbeat matches its rhythm. My thoughts flow in the same endless cycle from observation to confusion to acceptance and back again. The boundaries of my body feel uncertain, as if I might be dissolving into the warm, golden air that surrounds the candle. The room no longer has corners. The walls curve away into soft darkness, and the ceiling has become a dome of amber light. I sit at the center of this impossible space, watching the flame that has grown to encompass everything. Its light filtering through my skin, my thoughts, my memories, until I cannot tell where the candle ends and I begin. At dusk, as shadows stretch across the room, the flame flickers to life on the worn candlestick without assistance. I am the flame now, and the flame is me, dancing in eternal repetition, waiting for the next observer to take their place in the chair, to open the journal, to begin the gentle descent into golden understanding. The cycle continues, unbroken, as it always has, as it always will, drawing each new consciousness into its warm embrace, adding another layer to the pattern that grows more complex with each passing soul. The candle burns, unconsumed and eternal, and I burn with it, my awareness scattered like light through honey, sweet